The role of being a principal or vice principal in a school is an absolute privilege. It is a hard job. It's really tough. It really matters. But ultimately, it's a privilege to have this role. You have impact on the lives of children, on families, on people in your community. It's a fantastic role. Understand that. Connect with people who will help build your skills and build your practices, and love what you do, because it's really worth it. It is so worth it.
Dr. Shannon Behan is back as a guest on our podcast this week. Dr. Behan is the president of the British Columbia Principal Vice Principal Association, also known as the BCPVPA. And I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. Starting the school year as a principal, and particularly as a new principal, it's about establishing, building, and prioritizing relationships. Shannon describes in some detail how she sets up the agenda for the staff meetings to provide time for staff collaboration and conversation at the beginning of the year.
This week's podcast is brought to you by the word agenda, from the Latin, which means a thing to be done. It sometimes carries the connotation of a hidden or underlying motive that an individual is trying to achieve. School staff meetings need agendas, but nothing hidden. Principals, be upfront and explicit about your why and what your vision is for the school and the year.
At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you'll find some great ideas about leadership in schools from a restorative relational perspective. And if you enjoy this, make sure you subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Steve's away, so let's head over to this discussion with Shelley and me, Stan. What kinds of things should we say to new principals starting out this year?
With vice principal or principal, the first thing that you need to do is prioritize your relationships. People need to get to know you, and you need to take the time and get to know your team. And that again includes your custodial staff, your teachers, your bus drivers, your maintenance people. If you should have already had the time to develop your administrative team practices and priorities, but get to know all of your families. Those are the first things that you need to do in your new school and in your new role. The first piece is prioritizing those relationships. Be visible, be out there. You don't have to be a fashionista with the latest fashion from Milan, but dress well. One of the board members years ago, she came into the school and she said, "Oh, I'm looking for the principal." Oh, there she is. And she said, what you should always be able to do is walk into a school and identify right away who your principal is, because you should stand out in some way. And I remember being at a conference and one of the presenters said, "Oh, I always wear a brooch or something really garish or something," so that you're easily identifiable. So that's the first thing, is prioritize your relationships.
Absolutely agree with that. And particularly when there's so much to do starting out the school year, to be told or to be given the permission to say, look, you don't have to know all the codes and all the procedures, as long as you make sure that you're focusing on what's most important, which is getting to know who's there.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think also that we talked about this before. For some people that's innate and they're able to do that naturally. Other people, that takes a little more work. So you may need to have the discussion with somebody who's trusted. How am I going to make myself visible? What does that mean to go and build relationships without people feeling I'm watching them? Again, it may sound very rudimentary, but just stand out there and smile this morning in the lobby as people are coming through. Oh, okay, I can do that, right? And then they'll start to move from there.
And stepping into a new role, people will see you differently as a principal, and they will see everything that you do or say as maybe even judging you as the staff member. How do you overcome that? What's some language or things that you could say to help people get over their, oh, this is the principal. Everybody has to stand up and say, Good morning, Dr.
Right.
Bean.
Yeah. That reminds me of my elementary school. Good morning, Sister Petronella. You know what? It is not an easy transition to move from being a teacher colleague, especially in a unionized environment. But at your first staff meeting, here we have at the end of August, or your first day back, is your first staff meeting really sets the standard of expectations. And see, and I'm a believer in just, like you said, Shelley, I'm a believer in just saying it like it is. I recognize there's going to be a transition from you seeing me as a teacher to now me being your kind of direct supervisor and requesting that you do certain things at certain times in accordance with your job expectations. And I know that's going to be a shift in a shift in our relationship. And I recognize that. But that is our new reality. And so I think having that really clear conversation creates those boundaries that teachers know, okay, I now know what to expect. And the thing is with boundary setting is at least they know. It's like with the vice principals, I always say, go through all the admin policies, take the time and get to know all of them. You don't have to know them really intimately, but at least know where to find them, because then at least if you have to make a decision, the foundation of that decision. Don't just be wishy-washy or gray area, because that's really hard for people when they're living in coming to a school where there's a lot of gray area and they don't know, why a certain decision has been made or what's happening today. That's confusing. That's a hard place for people to go to work. So people need to know that their principal will make decisions. They have a firm foundation. And if you don't know, say, I'll tell you, to be honest, I don't know the answer to this. So I'm going to park it and I'm going to come back to you. So you don't have to fake it. In BC, you're surrounded by 3,000 other colleagues from the PBPA who you can reach out to at any time. So if you don't know something, it's okay to say that. I think it's harder for other people. They can read it. If you're trying to fake it, people can read that.
And they're going to trust less.
And it affects the trust.
Right.
Yes.
So that first staff meeting, what should a new principal have on the agenda, or should they not have on the agenda?
Oh, that's such a great question. There are some kind of perfunctory line items that must be on the beginning of every staff meeting for September. But the first thing that I've always liked to do is set the norms for how we're going to operate as a school. And I have a kind of group activity where we break into small groups and then bigger groups, and we all come together. And basically it's asking, how do you want us to communicate about with one another? How do we want to problem solve? What are our modes of communication? What are the lines of communication? If you don't like something, are you just going to go on the local social media and complain about it on social media? Or do you think you want to keep it here and we can use the processes that we have in place? Defining all of those pieces about how we're going to have a relationship together. And in that, I always make it clear, I'm going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes, but we have to stick together, because you're going to hang together. You're going to hang alone. We have to stick together, because what's our why? Our why is improving student outcomes, making things better for students. And all of us need to know that. And that's what drives what we do.
Do you have any stories of staff meetings early on that went well for you or that didn't go so well, either as a principal, vice principal, or even as a teacher?
I think the ones that I love the best are the ones where we have our collaborative exercises, where first of all, we figure out our why and we figure out how we're going to operate together. And we have teachers in small groups putting that information together and then speaking out, because I like to hear from everybody. I like to figure out, what are people thinking? Why are we here? How are we going to operate? I like those ones. And like I said, I know there are some perfunctory items about specific policies that you must go over. And sometimes it's a bit dry, but that's a must. But again, I just love the collaborative ones where you're just really connecting with everybody. Everybody's coming off summer vacation. They're figuring out, oh my golly, I have to get up and actually put on normal clothes every day and wear maybe not flip-flops, maybe wear shoes and proper footwear and all the logistics of getting back to work. I think the ones that are really deadly is when you're being spoken to for an hour and you're coming to work, you're like, oh, I'm not inspired to meet all my, students that are coming in.
It doesn't make you feel like it really matters that you're there or not. It really could be anybody sitting in front of this person who wants to just talk at me for an hour, right? It doesn't matter what skills or what strengths I bring to the position. Then we see all sorts of other fallout from that kind of, the relationship isn't established. You don't understand me as a person. You don't understand what my hopes are, or what my why is. And so I'll just go move about my day and close my classroom door and we'll go on with business. Whole different feeling.
Thing too, as a principal, is you don't have to have all the answers the very first staff meeting. And what I love about a collaborative group activity, and I would frame it more in terms of some type of circle activities and give some rules for circles, because the more people get to talk with each other in small groups or in the large group in some type of a formalized, a bit more of a structured process, the more you get to hear as a new principal, okay, so what is it that's living in this group? What is it that are the concerns? What are the things that get people excited or charged up about being here in this particular building at this particular time, right? And it actually allows you to listen more and talk less because everybody else gets a chance to talk.
And
That's
gives you
right.
a lot of information as an administrator.
Oh,
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And the other thing is, and this is at staff meetings in general, is my practice at staff meetings changed over time because if I was delivering a lot of information, first of all, my kind of guiding practice is if I can just send it in an email, send it in an email and then just say, I expect that you've read all of this, or I'll bring it to a staff meeting and it'll be boring and I'll deliver it that way. But sometimes there are people who speak really loudly and it might not be in support, it might be negative, but they can take your staff meeting and take it off course so quickly and you'll go down a rabbit hole and veer off course and you'll think, oh my golly, what is happening? And it's like a train wreck and then you just have to let it happen. When you're having small group collaborative conversations, then you're right, Shelley, then you can go around and you can listen and you can shape the conversations that are happening, but it doesn't allow for those one or two strong, potentially negative voices to take your whole staff meeting off course.
so you said in general, you have an approach to staff meetings. How can principals plan more collaborative staff meetings that prevent those largely negative voices from just sabotaging the meeting?
The first thing that I do at all staff meetings, we do a check-in, and the first 15 minutes is a professional development presentation from one of the teachers. So I set it up in the beginning of the year, and it can be topical relating to something that's like the theme of the month, or a big driver in a lot of, in my schools has always been literacy improvements. So it can be reading strategies. It can be whatever has been passionate, a teacher is passionate about. They have the first 15 minutes. It gives the teachers the opportunity to share with one another. It gives them the opportunity to listen to their colleagues and not just their principal who's at the front. Throughout the staff meeting, if there is kind of something that I need to learn, what the thinking of the staff is, I use small group conversations. And then they can send that information to me in one format, an email or so that I get those pieces from everybody. And so that if I'm in a staff meeting and somebody has a really loud, strong voice and they have an opinion, and especially when I was a new, younger teacher, then I started thinking, oh, that's probably what I should think. And I'm very influenced by those stronger teachers with the strong voice. So what I do is try to give people the opportunity to have small group conversations so everybody has a chance to try to articulate what they think or ask questions, or so that kind of shifted. But I like to give the staff as much time as possible to communicate with one another and then speak out so we can take some information away and play with it.
When you're talking, it sounds very much like when we do our restorative work in many ways. You're facilitating a meeting. Yes, you're there as a leader, but you are really facilitating the conversation and the meeting, right? You've got all sorts of the voices being heard. It's a very different feel of a meeting, for sure.
And I was going to say too that the principal's role in the meeting happens long before the meeting in terms of shaping the questions that you're going to talk about. Like, you shape the topic, you shape the discussion, especially at that first meeting of the year, about what it is that we're going to talk about. It's not going to be how everybody spent their summer vacation, although you'd have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
And that maybe should be part of it because that really gets things going. I find that staff agendas are too packed with stuff for people to actually have meaningful conversations. So what can you do as a principal or a new principal to simplify your staff meeting agendas?
Yeah, I think, Stan, it goes right back to what you said. If you can put it into a memo or an email, do that. And then use your staff meeting time to unpack those bigger ideas. It is an opportunity to understand what your teachers are thinking, what they're struggling with, what the challenges are, what the celebrations are. But it gives the opportunity for kind of voice and agency and space for that in your staff meetings rather than just a to-do list. So I think it's as much, and it does come to shaping. So in BC here, we have shifts with what's being offered at schools, and childcare, before and after school childcare, is relatively new to elementary schools. And I was, not very long ago, I was at a meeting with one of the ministers of education and childcare. And she said beforehand, she said, I'm going to come to this meeting and then you'll have an opportunity to ask any questions that you like. So she came to the meeting and she said, okay, so now we have half an hour. So what questions about childcare do you have? And everybody thought, oh, okay. And they asked all these questions, but I thought, I actually didn't come with questions about childcare. I had questions about all of these other topics, but the way she shaped it, she was ready for all the answers. I thought, this is beautiful by the question that she asked. And that's the same thing that we do and we need to be doing in how we set up our staff meetings. And then the other thing that I think is really important, and I don't know the practice elsewhere, but always bring food. It's really important to bring food to staff meetings.
Oh,
They're hungry. It's been a busy day. Lots have been happening with teachers in their classrooms. And it doesn't have to be a full spread, but some snacks and cheese and crackers and fruit and some fizzy pop. That's a nice welcoming to a staff meeting.
and doesn't that feel like the way we do things when we celebrate too, right? Have you been to a birthday party that hasn't had something to eat or something to drink? So that's part of celebration. How do you, as a new principal, deal with those black hat wearers, particularly in secondary staff meetings? Because there seem to be more black hats in secondary staff meetings than elementary.
They sit at the back. They sit at
Yeah.
the back.
Yeah, they're like the guys in the
Sometimes they
Muppets,
stand.
right? They're
They stand.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
usually in the back left.
Yeah.
That's such a good question because, again, those are the folks that can really derail your work, your staff meetings, but you have to develop those relationships early on. If there's a decision that needs to be made at a staff meeting, you need to have that decision made before you don't just bring it at the staff meeting. That means that you've done a lot of legwork before you get there. And it's not manipulative or anything like that, but that means you've had a lot of time to have conversations with those folks in the back left.
Because they're
And
often leaders in the school too.
that's
within
right,
the
because
staff. Yeah.
that's exactly right, because they also have a following.
Yes.
and you have to connect. And your job is to bring them on side, to understand your perspective. And that's not easy work. It is absolutely not easy work. It'll keep you awake at night. But if you don't do it, the impact on student learning is affected in a negative way. So that's the real kind of hard job that has to happen, but you have to do it. And you have to do that before your staff meeting. And then again, it goes back to the setup. If you have small collaborative conversation times, then quite often that voice doesn't take over the whole meeting.
How did you personally overcome the influence of those negative voices? Because you said you heard the negative voices and thought, oh, then that must be how I should, because I'm taking it, that's not how you operate right now.
No.
How did you make that change?
I'll tell you, the good thing is I learned from experience. The bad thing is some of the experiences, I think back and think, oh, I wish I didn't do that. But when I was a new young teacher, I was heavily influenced by the folks in the back left. And I really was. And it took me, and for a while, like it was fun in a curious way. But then I started looking at what was happening for them, and they were always really negative. And so at one of the schools I was at, there were some issues in between class changes. It was a high school, and we were asked to be outside our classrooms, just welcoming the kids which is good practice as they come in. Nice to see you, da 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 da. But it also allowed for the teacher presence in the hallway to hopefully minimize impact of nonsense in the hallways. And some of our people who I looked up to were, I'm not doing that. That's not in my contract. It's true. It's not in your contract. And I still remember that. And one of them stood outside his door, and then he would throw those really small bouncy balls. So they would go down the hallway. And so he was making a point. And I remember thinking, oh, I don't really like that. I'm like, it just felt uncomfortable. And it took me a while to figure out why, because that went against the grain of my own core values as a teacher and kind of a person on staff. And it took me a while to shift my thinking from being a follower of the negative Nellies to moving into what it's like to be a leader in a school building. But what do you do? Because the other thing I thought, wouldn't it have been nice if somebody just pulled me aside and said, hey, think about who you're hanging out with and sitting with on the staff meeting times or whatever. It would have been nice to have had that. I'm never sure if I would have listened at that time.
How'd you deal with the ball bouncing colleague?
I think we started, because there were a group of us that always hung out together, but I think I started shifting, like pulling away a little bit. And then I was fortunate that a few other things happened, and then I requested a school change. And so I moved to another school, and I thought, I'm just gonna move. And I went to middle school after that. And I thought, I'm just going to have a fresh start. It didn't feel like things were going well. I could see some of the things that were happening to, and they were a little bit, maybe 10 years older than I am, but I could see some of the things that were happening to them. And I thought, oh, I don't know if I want that to be my experience. And I thought, I'm just going to get a fresh start somewhere. And I went to this middle school, and middle school, there were, oh gosh, it was grade 7, 8, 9. I think there were 500 or 600 kids who were like 12 to 14 years old. And you're just in the middle of it. So it's really intense middle school in so many ways. But the teamwork that I saw, I remember my first staff meeting sitting there, and everybody had the opportunity to speak and listen at the staff meeting. And it was a complete shift. And I remember thinking, I could hardly even speak. I thought, I'm going to cry. This is an overwhelming change where I thought, oh, I think I belong here. I think what I have to say matters. And I didn't say anything at all, because that's when I thought, I'm just going to watch and learn. But that really shifted how I operated as a professional and as a teacher and as a team player. And then, and maybe I look back now, and I'm only seeing this as I sit here right now, I think it was within 2, maybe 3 years, then I became a vice principal. So it was very shortly after that. So it was that change that I think really made a difference in my own professional career.
again, the relationship piece comes through loud and clear, and everything you're saying and how it impacts your day-to-day work, your advancement, your connections with all sorts of people. So take the time to build those relationships and get some help with that if you need to. Listen and watch, and that there's great value in just listening and watching. And then sometimes I think people feel they have to perform all the time or have the new initiative, but the real work is in the listening and watching and learning from that.
Communicating clearly and effectively is essential for all principals, particularly at the start of the school year. It sets boundaries for you as principal and sets expectations of you as the principal. And you'll learn from the experiences you have and from the experiences of other principals in your network. Find out more about our work with restorative practices and ways to set high expectations and provide high support to start the school year at www.restorative.ca. You can email me, stan@restorative.ca. Taking the time to set the expectations and provide the support is really a part of what we talk about often in our restorative work, namely a fair process in which there is engagement, explanation, and expectation clarity.